What if I told you that one quiet farmer, a few stubborn cows, and a rusty security camera nearly brought down an entire corporate land grab operation? This isn't just some local dispute over fence lines or morning mooing. This is a full-blown, high-stakes war between generational farmers and a ruthless HOA led by a designer-heeled villain who thinks a rooster crowing is a crime against suburbia. When they showed up at his pasture with fake violations, rigged complaints, and a checkbook fat enough to choke a horse, they thought he'd roll over. Instead, he rolled camera. What followed was sabotage, bribery, hidden recordings, viral TikToks, secret boardroom plots, and one sixth grader who accidentally captured the smoking gun. You won't believe how deep this rabbit hole goes, or how wildly it backfires. This is not just about cows. It's about legacy, land, and fighting like hell when the boots get muddy. Hit subscribe and support Real HOA Drama, because this is the kind of story they don't want you to hear, but you'll never forget once you do. Buckle up. It gets real. Fast. I still remember the smell of fresh hay and engine grease on my granddad's overalls. He bought this land back in 1947, right after he got back from the war, with little more than a handshake and a heart full of grit. He worked it with bare hands and a busted-up tractor that coughed more than it ran. Built every fence post himself, sunup to sundown, no shortcuts, no excuses. This land wasn't just soil, it was sacrifice, sweat, and soul. Then, 76 years later, a piece of paper showed up in my mailbox trying to erase all that. It was a bright Tuesday morning, the kind where the dew's still hanging on the grass, and the cows are already judging you for sleeping in past 5. I mosey down the gravel path, coffee in one hand, the dog nipping at my boots like usual. I pulled open the rusted mailbox, half expecting a seed catalog or maybe a coupon for tractor oil. Instead, I found a pristine white envelope, thicker than usual, like it meant business. And oh, it did. Notice of violation, Homeowners Association, was stamped across the top in bold letters like they thought it might scare me. It went on to say my cows were lowering the property values of the new development up the hill. Apparently, the sounds of mooing and the sight of livestock offended someone's delicate suburban sensibilities. They gave me 30 days to remove them or face escalating penalties. I stood there, stunned. Not angry yet, just the kind of dumbfounded you get when someone tells you your American flag's clashing with their aesthetic. Then I laughed. A long, low-belly laugh that sent my dog barking in circles. But something didn't sit right. See, it wasn't just the letter. The night before, I noticed one of the cows acting spooked, snorting toward the tree line like something was out there. I figured it was a raccoon or a coyote. But that morning, curiosity got the better of me, so I checked the footage from the security cameras I'd installed last fall after someone stole a box of fencing wire. What I found chilled me colder than a January wind in Kansas. 3 figures. Flashlights. Walking the edge of my pasture just past midnight. One of them stood square on the boundary line, snapping pictures of my barn, my fields, my cows. They weren't kids playing a dare. They moved like they had a purpose, like they knew exactly what they were doing. Now my jaw wasn't laughing anymore. You don't sneak around a man's land unless you're either planning to buy it or planning to bury it. I poured myself another cup of coffee, only this time I was wide awake. I sat on the porch, letter in hand, looking out over the pasture where my cows were chewing cud like nothing was wrong. But something was. This wasn't just some HOA gripe about noise or smell. This felt planned, coordinated, like they were gearing up for a takeover and had decided my cows were the first line to cross. What they didn't realize is these cows, they're not just livestock. They're legacy. And if the folks behind this letter thought they could push out a farmer with some fancy paper and a flashlight, well, they just picked a fight with the wrong fence line. It was the kind of morning that smells like freshly cut hay and freedom. I was out checking the east fence, cup of coffee in one hand, post driver in the other, when I saw her, Carla Whitman, striding across my pasture like she owned the place. She was flanked by 2 others, Mark Reeves, clipboard in hand like a mall cop with something to prove, and Allison Price, who looked like she was regretting every step she took in that field. Her eyes darted between cow patties like she was walking through a minefield. Carla, though? She marched straight toward me in a pair of beige stilettos, which, I gotta admit, was impressive considering she was traipsing through mud, manure, and my general irritation. Mister, she paused, glancing at the paper in her hand.
You.
I'm here on behalf of the Homeowners Association. Like I needed a reminder. I tipped my hat. Name's right there on the mailbox. Has been since 1947. She gave me that tight smile that says, I'd rather be at brunch, but here we are. We've received numerous complaints about your property, she started, waving the folder like a prosecutor in a TV courtroom drama. Your barn is considered an eyesore, the smell from your livestock is excessive, and your cows, well, frankly, they're disruptive to the peace and ambience of Willow Creek Estates. Ambience, I repeated, chewing the word like it didn't taste right. You mean the smell of fresh air and hard work? Mark chimed in, mumbling something about zoning violations, while flipping pages like he was reading the gospel of HOA rulebooks. That's when I reached into the glove box of my old truck and pulled out a weathered manila envelope, edges curled, the paper inside yellowed with time and sun. I handed it over to Carla like I was laying down 4 aces in a poker game. Zoning documents, I said, calm as a pond in spring. Signed, sealed, and stamped in 1943. This land's been designated agricultural use only for damn near 80 years. That includes barns, cows, and the occasional rooster crowing at sunrise. She flipped through the papers, and I swear I saw a vein twitch in her forehead. Where did you even get these? She asked like historical records were some kind of magic trick. My grandfather kept everything. Man had more filing cabinets than cows. That's when my neighbor Walter Grant wandered over. Retired judge, still sharp as a tack, and the only man I know who can quote both the Constitution and Green Acres in the same breath. You're wasting your time, he said to Carla, hands in the pockets of his old denim jacket. This land's protected. And those documents, he nodded toward the envelope in her manicured hands, are more legally binding than any rule your HOA cooked up last month. Carla's eyes narrowed. Sir, we're simply trying to maintain standards. This community has invested in a certain aesthetic. And you bought your house next to a working farm. I cut in. What did you think the cows were? Yard decorations. Allison looked like she wanted to melt into the dirt. Mark was suddenly very interested in his shoelaces. Carla straightened her shoulders, heels sinking just slightly deeper into the earth. You'll be hearing from our legal department. I look forward to it, I said, tipping my hat again. But next time, maybe wear boots. She stormed off, the other 2 trailing behind, heels squishing in the mud like the universe itself was mocking them. As they disappeared past the fence line, Walter turned to me, grinning. Hell of a thing, he said, trying to bulldoze tradition with bureaucracy. But they picked the wrong farmer for that fight. I just nodded, watching the cows gather near the fence, chewing calmly, unconcerned. They'd seen worse storms than this. But me? I was just getting warmed up. A few days after Carla's pasture parade, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and a stack of HOA letters spread out like playing cards in front of me. Each one was typed, sealed, and supposedly signed by one of my neighbors, people I've bartered hay with, plowed snow for, and fixed fences beside for years. Folks who'd brought pies when my wife was sick. Folks who'd once helped me pull a calf out of a breech berth at 2 a.m. But now, apparently, they were calling my barn an unsightly structure and claiming my cows were a daily disturbance. It didn't make sense. I picked up a letter from Mrs. Nora Hill, who's lived just down the road longer than the post office's been delivering mail here. Sweetest woman you'll ever meet. Bakes banana bread that'll make you forget your own name. According to the HOA letter, she'd filed a formal complaint about odor violations and the unsanitary visual impact of livestock. I nearly spit out my coffee. Now, Nora's the kind of woman who hand-knit sweaters for newborn calves in the winter. So unless she'd had a personality transplant, something smelled funny, and it sure wasn't my cows. I decided to do what any decent neighbor would do, knock on her door. She answered in a flowered apron, a dusting of flour on her hands, and a look of confusion when I showed her the letter. Her brows furrowed deep enough to plant corn in. "I never signed this," she said, clutching the paper like it was poison. "I would never complain about your farm, dear. Your cows are the only thing keeping this neighborhood honest." I nodded. That's what I thought. And that's when it hit me. They were faking the complaints, fabricating them, using good folks' names to build a paper case against me, and probably others like me. I visited 3 more neighbors that afternoon. Same story. Shock, denial, then fury. Old Mr. Delaney even called the sheriff on the spot. That evening, at a town meeting about road repairs, I saw Allison Price standing alone near the back wall, holding a styrofoam cup of weak coffee like it was burning her hand. She was one of the HOA members who'd marched onto my property with Carla, clipboard and all. But now, she looked like she'd just seen the ghost of common sense. "Allison," I said, walking up slow, "mind if I ask you something?" She sighed before I could even start. "You're here about the complaints, aren't you?" I raised an eyebrow. "So you know." She nodded, eyes darting to make sure Carla wasn't nearby. I started noticing the signatures didn't match our records. A few names weren't even on file as residents. When I asked Carla about it, she told me to stay in my lane. She looked up, biting her lip. "This isn't what I signed up for." Her voice was low, but firm. There was a flicker of something behind her eyes, guilt, maybe. Or maybe the first crack in the dam. "They're not just targeting you," she whispered. "They're going after every remaining agricultural parcel within HOA boundaries. One by one." I leaned in close. "Then they've got a bigger problem than my cows." She glanced at me, then at the exit door. "Be careful. Carla plays dirty. And Ethan, her husband? He doesn't play at all." I walked away from that meeting with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about livestock anymore. It was about control. About erasing the soul of this land one fake signature at a time. But now that I knew the game, I planned to play it better. You ever get that itch at the back of your neck like something's watching you, even when the fields are empty and the night still as death? I'd been feeling it for weeks. At first, I blamed it on nerves. After all, HOA wars and forged complaint letters aren't exactly part of a normal Tuesday out here. But something deeper was gnawing at me. So I went back to the one thing that never lies: the security cameras mounted on my barn. I scrolled through weeks of footage. Cows. Coyotes. Me falling off a ladder. Nothing suspicious until last Wednesday night. 1:12 a.m. sharp. A black SUV rolled to a stop just outside my property line. No headlights. No engine noise. Probably electric. Real sneaky stuff. 2 people stepped out, flashlights in hand, moving slow and deliberate, like they were casing a bank instead of a pasture. I zoomed in on the footage. One of them was Carla Whitman. The other? A tall man in a dark suit with a phone glued to his ear, pointing at my land like it was already on some blueprint. Even grainy and pixelated, I could tell this wasn't just some HOA volunteer. He had the vibe of someone who expected to own everything he looked at. Later, with a little digging and a few calls, I got the name. Ethan Whitman. Carla's husband. CEO of Western Rise Developments, a company I'd heard whispers about. Slick, fast-talking, and famous for turning open farmland into concrete kingdoms. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they made. That's when the real bombshell came. I found Julia Bennett, Carla's assistant, sitting in her car outside the community center, chain-smoking like her life depended on it. She looked exhausted, eyes red, hands shaking. When she saw me, she flinched like she'd been caught. "I can't sleep," she said, thrusting an envelope into my hands. "I shouldn't be doing this, but I didn't sign up to ruin families." Inside was a USB drive. "Watch it alone," she whispered. "And be ready." Back at the house, I popped the drive into my old laptop. What came up made my skin crawl. Video recordings. Secret board meetings. Private Zoom calls. Even emails. In one clip, Carla sits at the head of a long conference table, flanked by Mark Reeves and 2 unfamiliar faces. Ethan stands at the whiteboard, outlining a plan like a general plotting a military invasion. On the screen behind him, a map of our entire community, color-coded by who they thought would cave easily and who might fight back. My farm was unread. A note next to it read, "Stubborn. Use pressure tactics. Wait for property value to drop. Last phase." They weren't just trying to shut me up. They were planning to bleed me out, slowly, methodically, until I either gave in or broke down. The files included a document labeled Priority Acquisition Targets, a list of 10 family-owned farms, all with rich history and prime location. Bill Thompson, the Carson family, even the Millers, whose land bordered the new golf course. Every single name had a strategy next to it. Flood with violations. Offer buyout after public nuisance complaint. Sabotage value. This wasn't a dispute. This was a hostile takeover in khakis and committee meetings. I sat there in the glow of the laptop screen, heart pounding. Outside, the cows were quiet. Too quiet. Like they knew something was wrong. They thought they could bury this in bureaucracy. That a few fake complaints and midnight meetings could outmaneuver generations of blood, sweat, and dirt. They thought wrong. Because now, I had the receipts. And a storm was coming. It happened just after midnight, under one of those big country skies where the stars look close enough to grab. I was dead asleep, dreaming about calves and carburetors, when the phone rang. Not the cell, the landline. The kind of call you only get when something's gone real wrong. "Your cows are on the road," came the voice of Deputy Mills, calm but clipped. "One just wandered onto County Route 14. We've got traffic stopped. No injuries this time." I was out the door before the dial tone hit. The gravel flew as I tore down the driveway, headlights bouncing through the darkness. And sure enough, there they were. A handful of my girls, standing in the middle of the road like they owned the place, blinking at the flashing lights like it was a disco party. One of them had nudged a bumper on a sedan. No one was hurt, thank God. The driver just looked rattled. And furious. After we herded the cows back in, I found the breach. South fence line. Wire cut clean through. Not torn, not broken, cut. Snipped right at the post. This wasn't a hungry coyote or a busted storm post. This was intentional. And I knew exactly who'd benefit from it. The next morning, I didn't bother waiting for HOA to show up. They were already there. Carla Whitman, standing smug in a pressed blazer, like she'd just won a lawsuit. Mark Reeves stood behind her holding a camera. Allison Price hung back, visibly uncomfortable. "Unsecured livestock," Carla announced, waving a folder like it was the word of God. "You've violated Section 4B of the Community Safety Ordinance. The board will be issuing a formal citation and considering fines." I didn't say a word, just walked over to my barn, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and strolled back with my laptop under one arm. "Want to see who really violated something?" I asked, popping open the footage from my security cam. There, clear as day, was a man in dark clothes, a cap pulled low, crouching at the fence line. He snipped the wire in 3 places, stood, looked around, and walked calmly back to a black SUV. The license plate was blurry, but the company logo on his jacket wasn't. Western Rise Developments. I turned the screen so Carla could see. For the first time, she flinched. Mark lowered the camera. Allison took a half step forward like she might say something, then stopped. "This was sabotage," I said quietly. "And you know it." Carla tried to recover. "That doesn't prove intent. It could be anyone who just happens to work for your husband's company. On my property? Cutting my fence." I took a step forward. "You've been playing games. But now someone could have gotten killed." That afternoon, I told Walter Grant everything. The footage, the fence, the citation. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly, chewing on the end of a pen. "I know someone you need to talk to," he said. "Name's Eric Dawson. Investigative reporter. Has a nose for this kind of rot. Exposed a land swap scandal in Oak Hollow last year. You give him what you've got and he'll dig up the rest." So I did. I sent Eric the USB, the camera footage, the phony complaints, everything. Within hours, he called back. "Holy hell," he muttered. "This isn't just dirty. It's engineered." I think you've just kicked a hornet's nest, my friend.
Good.
Because I wasn't just fixing a fence anymore. I was drawing a line in the dirt and daring them to cross it again. I hadn't spoken to Dean Marshall in months, not really anyway. We'd been neighborly in that distant, polite farmer kind of way. A nod at the feed store, a wave on the tractor. But when the HOA started circling like buzzards, Dean went quiet. Too quiet. He owned a modest piece of land just west of mine. Not much more than a dozen acres and some dairy cows, but it was his father's before him, and that still meant something around here. Or so I thought. When the letters came, mine, Bill Thompson's, the Carson family's, we all looked to each other for support.
But Dean?
Dean kept his head down. No meetings, no calls, no trouble. Until one morning, about a week after the fence incident, I found him waiting by my truck.
Hat in hand.
Face drawn like he hadn't slept in days. Got a minute, he asked. Depends, I said. You finally here to talk, or just looking to borrow diesel? He gave a sad smile. A little of both. We walked over to the porch. He sat down like the guilt weighed more than his body. I need to tell you something, he said. And you probably won't like it. I leaned against the post, arms crossed. Try me. He sighed. Back when this all started, Carla came to me, said if I stayed quiet, didn't speak up, didn't stir trouble, they'd buy me out. Above market, she said. Enough for a new start. A bigger place. Maybe somewhere closer to town. I didn't say a word. Just stared. I figured, hell, I'm just one farmer. Let the big guys like you and Bill fight it out. I was tired. I got scared. He rubbed his eyes. But then I saw what they did to your fence. Heard what happened to your cows. That SUV parked outside your land like it already had the deed. I knew what I'd done, or not done. I stayed quiet a beat longer, letting it settle. Why now? I asked. Dean pulled a small recorder out of his coat pocket, placed it on the table like a confession. I started recording meetings.
Calls. Carla. Ethan.
I didn't know what I'd do with it, but I kept it. Just in case. I hit play. Carla's voice came through, clipped and smug. Dean's agreed to keep quiet. He'll fold when the price is right. Then Ethan's.
Good.
Keep the others distracted with violations and fake complaints. Every nuisance call drops the appraisal another notch. Dean flinched as it played. Like hearing it again physically hurt. They weren't just buying land, he muttered. They were buying silence. Manipulating values, stoking resentment. Like we were pawns in their little development game. I looked at him. For a moment, I didn't see the man who turned his back. I saw someone trying to make it right. You screwed up, I said. But at least now you're standing up. He nodded, voice soft. I was wrong to stay quiet. But I won't stay quiet another damn day. Dean took a deep breath, eyes steadier now. You still got that reporter's number? I smiled for the first time in days.
Yeah.
And I think he's gonna want to hear this. If you told me the fight for my farm would take a sharp turn thanks to a class of 6th graders and a TikTok influencer mom, I'd have laughed you clean off my porch. But that's exactly how it happened. It started on a Thursday morning when a yellow school bus pulled up along the gravel road and coughed out a dozen kids from Willow Creek Elementary. Turns out their teacher, Mrs. Delgado, had assigned a class project called Life on the Farm. The idea was simple. Pick a local farm, learn how it works, and make a short video to present in class. Now, most folks around here don't jump at the idea of a bunch of city kids poking around their land, but I've got a soft spot for the next generation. Plus, I figured if they were learning where milk came from, it was better they saw it coming from a real cow and not a cartoon bottle. So I gave them the grand tour, cows, chicken coop, the old red barn that's more duct tape than wood these days. The kids asked a million questions, and one of them, Liam, a sharp little fellow with freckles and a camera strapped to his chest, stuck close to my heels the whole time. At some point, I left the group with Mrs. Delgado, while I went to grab lemonade from the house. That's when it happened. Carla Whitman showed up unannounced, her Lexus parked half on the road, half in a patch of wildflowers she'd probably call landscape contamination. She stomped right over to the front gate where I had a sign posted clear as daylight. Protected agricultural land, since 1943. Only this time, she wasn't alone. One of the HOA volunteers, some guy I didn't recognize, was with her, toolbox in hand. From what Liam later told me, he was filming the cows from across the pasture when he noticed Carla gesturing toward the sign, whispering something. Then, as bold as a bear in a blueberry patch, she said out loud, "Just take it down." The fewer reminders these people have about their so-called rights, the better. Liam, bless him, zoomed right in.
Got the whole thing.
Carla's voice, her smug little smirk, the volunteer unbolting the sign, the kids gasping. When I came back out, Carla was already gone. But Liam came running up with eyes the size of hubcaps. "Mister," he said, panting, "I think I filmed something important." He wasn't wrong. His mom, Chloe, picked him up later that day. She's one of those momfluencers, makes videos about parenting, baking, and occasionally calling out HOA ridiculousness in her spare time. When she saw the footage, her jaw hit the floor. By that evening, she'd posted a clip titled, "HOA President Caught Removing Legal Agricultural Sign," with kids watching. It hit 30,000 views by midnight, 100,000 by morning. By lunchtime, a local news station had picked it up. The hashtag started trending. Hashtag Farmgate, hashtag Hands Off Our Land, hashtag HOA Horrors. Comments poured in from across the country. "That kid's a hero. So proud of small-town truth standing up to big money lies. What kind of HOA messes with a school field trip?" Even city folks started chiming in, saying they'd moved to the countryside to be near real farms, not HOA-policed golf course clones. It was the kind of exposure we couldn't have bought with all the legal fees in the world. And it came from a sixth grader with a camera and the courage to speak up. That night, I stood out on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, cows lowing gently in the distance. I looked at that same sign, now bolted back up, this time with reinforced brackets, and smiled. They tried to silence us. Instead, they gave us a louder voice than ever. It was one of those rare afternoons where everything feels still. Too still. The kind of quiet that warns you a storm's coming, even if the sky's blue. I was finishing up feeding when I saw the black SUV roll up my drive, tires crunching gravel like they owned it. Ethan Whitman stepped out first, looking like a man used to closing deals over steak dinners and cigars. Behind him were two lawyers in tailored suits, shoes way too shiny for this kind of dirt. One of them carried a sleek leather briefcase. The other? A checkbook. "You've made quite the fuss," Ethan said, smoothing down his blazer as if that'd protect him from cow dust. "But let's be reasonable." I didn't say a word, just leaned against the fence and waited for him to try something stupid. "This land," he gestured like he was unveiling a museum piece, "has potential. And while your little rebellion has been entertaining, we both know how this ends. Developments happen. People move on. Heritage makes for nice bedtime stories, but progress pays the bills." Then he nodded to the lawyer, who flipped open the checkbook and scribbled something down like it was just another Tuesday. Ethan tore the check from the pad and held it out. 6 zeros. Enough money to buy a bigger farm, a newer truck, and probably a beach house to cry in when it was all over. "Name your price," he said. "This can all be over. No more legal battles. No more viral videos. Just you, free and clear." I looked at the check. Then I looked past him. Because I wasn't alone. Word had gotten out. Thanks to Chloe's viral post, the USB footage, and maybe just good old-fashioned neighbor loyalty. Folks had started showing up. Dean Marshall pulled in with his rusted Ford. Bill Thompson came with his daughter in tow. Mrs. Nora Hill brought a folding chair and her banana bread like it was a front-row seat to justice. By the time Ethan realized what was happening, a dozen people stood behind me. Phones out. Cameras rolling. Live streams flashing up on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere people would watch. "You're on camera," I said flatly. "Might want to smile." Ethan's jaw twitched. "You think public sympathy's going to stop a legal acquisition?"
"No," I said.
"But truth might." Because just then, at that exact moment, a screen lit up inside the county commissioner's office, 20 miles away, where the latest HOA hearing had just started. The USB footage Dean had handed over was being played in full. Carla's voice. Ethan's strategy. Use pressure tactics. Lower the appraised value. Push the stubborn ones last. Commissioners stared, stunned. Reporters typed like their keyboards were on fire. One official actually stood up and walked out of the meeting, phone glued to his ear. Back on my land, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't answer it. Instead, he looked at me like a man realizing he just stepped into his own trap. I held out my hand. Not for the check, but for the camera someone handed me. You want a picture of progress? I said. Get one of this. And I turned the lens toward the crowd. Farmers. Teachers.
Kids.
People who believed in something more than money. People who saw past the promises and stood up for the truth. Ethan lowered the check, stuffed it back in his coat, and walked away without a word. The lawyers followed, shoulders tight, eyes down. As the SUV disappeared down the road, someone started clapping. Then another. Then all of them. And not for me, but for us. Because that day on that dirt road, we didn't just stop a buyout. We proved we weren't for sale. It was a foggy Monday morning when the news broke, the kind that makes you feel like something big is coming. The kind of day where the roosters crow a little louder and the cows get real still, like even they know the air's about to shift. And shift it did. At 6:42 a.m., Carla Whitman and her husband Ethan were arrested outside their gated home in Willow Creek Estates. Carla still had curlers in her hair. Ethan tried to argue with the deputies, waving around something that looked suspiciously like a golf club and shouting about mistaken identity. Didn't work. By noon, the headlines were everywhere. HOA president and developer husband indicted in massive land fraud scheme. Western Rise exposed as shell for nationwide farm buyouts. State lawmakers fast-track bill to protect family farms. It was like years of quiet corruption had finally hit a wall made of barbed wire and barnwood. See, once that USB went public and the live streams rolled across every screen from here to Sacramento, it opened the floodgates. Turns out, Western Rise Developments wasn't just targeting my pasture. They were a front for a network of shadowy investment firms that had been quietly buying up family farmland across 5 states. HOA by HOA. Regulation by regulation. Inch by inch. They used forged complaint letters, midnight property inspections, zoning loopholes, and manufactured nuisance violations to drive out generational farmers, then swooped in to buy low and flip high. It was brilliant, really.
Cold. Calculated.
And now, completely exposed. In court, the prosecution laid it out like a slow-cooked meal, each piece juicier than the last. Wire fraud, conspiracy, falsifying legal documents, market manipulation, abuse of public office. They played the tapes, showed the maps, showed the money trails, the bribes, the emails titled things like Accelerated Displacement Strategy, Q3 Targets. Yeah, they really named it that. Like farmers are just chess pieces on a spreadsheet. I sat in the back of the courtroom next to Walter Grant, our retired judge turned full-time truth sniper. He kept nodding as each charge was read, like he was ticking boxes on a grocery list of vindication. Across the aisle were faces I'd seen all my life: Bill Thompson, Nora Hill, Dean Marshall, even little Liam and his mom Chloe, who now had 500,000 followers and was wearing a #FarmStrong hoodie like it was battle armor. But the moment that hit hardest? When the state attorney general stood up, cleared his throat, and announced, as a direct response to the events in Willow Creek, the legislature has officially passed the Heritage Farm Protection Act, an emergency law that restricts HOA overreach on agricultural land and grants permanent protection to generational farms from development-based pressure tactics. There was a beat of silence. Then the whole room erupted.
Tears. Clapping.
A cowboy hat thrown in the air. I swear I saw Walter choke up, though he blamed it on courtroom dust. That day, we didn't just watch 2 corrupt people get led away in cuffs. We watched a movement take root. We watched the system for once side with the soil. Side with the people who rise before dawn, who don't clock out at 5, who grow more than crops. They grow communities. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the silo, I walked my fence line, same as I'd done every day since I could walk. The cows grazed peacefully. The barn creaked in that familiar way. And my land?
Still mine.
Justice doesn't always come quickly. But when it finally arrives, wearing boots and carrying a folder full of receipts, it feels like rain after a drought. There's a stillness to victory that you don't expect. It's not loud or dramatic, like in the movies. It's quiet.
Steady.
Like the way morning fog rolls off the pasture after a long, hard rain. That's what it felt like when the dust finally settled. The HOA board, once a tool for threats and manipulation, had been completely restructured. The new president? None other than Mrs. Nora Hill, the very woman they tried to use as a fake complaint. She showed up to her first meeting wearing her Sunday hat and a button that read Farmers First. Her first act in office? Tearing up the HOA regulation book and tossing it in the shredder. This isn't a subdivision, she told the crowd. It's a community. And it's time we started acting like one. And act like one we did. The farm that once had a for sale bullseye painted on it by greedy developers became something else entirely. Local schools started bringing busloads of students to learn where their food came from, real food, not factory-wrapped. I partnered with Mrs. Delgado, Liam's teacher, to start a weekly Farm 101 field day, complete with hands-on milking demos and hayrides. Every Saturday morning, our old tractor barn turned into a farmer's market, bustling with families, fresh eggs, hand-churned butter, tomatoes the size of baseballs, and jams that could make a grown man cry. Chloe, Liam's mom, live-streamed the whole thing every week, calling it Field to Phone. People loved it. Even folks from the fancy new houses up the hill came down to shop, talk, and learn. Turns out they didn't hate the farm, they just didn't understand it. Once they did, they embraced it. One day, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Out stepped my son, Ben. He'd been living in the city, cubicle job, condo mortgage, traffic that makes a man question his life choices. We hadn't talked much during the chaos, but he'd been following it all. The live streams. The trial. The headlines. I figured if the cows made it through all that, he said, setting down a duffel bag. Maybe I can too. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and handed him a shovel. That first morning, we walked the fence line together, me, Ben, and the cows that started it all. Still here. Still grazing. Still lowing like the world hadn't tried to silence them. Funny thing is, the property values, the very thing Carla and her kind claimed my cows were ruining, have gone up. Way up. Turns out, people want to live next to something real. Not plastic fountains and cookie-cutter houses, but soil that grows food. Neighbors who wave. Kids who know where milk comes from. The bank called last week, said my land's worth more than it's ever been. I thanked them and hung up, because I already knew what it was worth. This land held the footprints of my father, and his before him. It held the sound of my son's boots stepping back into a life he thought he'd outgrown. It held the stories we almost lost, but refused to let go. And those cows? They're not just livestock anymore. They're symbols. Of grit. Of history. Of the stubborn beauty of not backing down. Out here, progress doesn't mean paving over the past. It means growing forward with it. So if you're ever driving through Willow Creek and see a hand-painted sign that says Heritage Farm Tours, Cows Welcome, HOA Not Required, stop by. We've got butter, stories, and a front porch seat waiting just for you.